South Carolina emerged from the Bayou victorious on Thursday night after a hard-fought battle with the number 9 LSU Tigers. How did they do it? We'll talk about that and more on today's Locked On Gamecocks.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both wherever you get your audio podcasts daily and also on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. What a night it was for South Carolina's women's basketball program. Gotta admit, Gamecock fans, it did not come easy, and there were certainly some moments in this game where it kind of seemed like things could swing in the Tigers' direction. But in spite of some of the bad stretches that they had, South Carolina found a way to leave the Pete Maravich Center with a victory, remaining undefeated, and defeating the LSU Tigers for, I believe now, the 15th straight time in their series history, which is just a remarkable feat to pull off against any conference opponent. And there's not just one thing that you can point to with how this win came about for the Gamecocks. There are multiple areas that we have to discuss. So let's dive into the reasons that South Carolina won this game. Starting off with the timely three-point shots. This is what a lot of fans are going to remember the most coming out of this game because Bree Hall was the one that hit two go-ahead three-pointers in the final 3 minutes of this game to help the Gamecocks separate themselves from the Tigers at the end. However, it wasn't just those two three-point shots that really helped stymie the momentum that the Tigers had been building at certain points in this game. We have to go all the way back to the first quarter. South Carolina had struggled mightily on the defensive end in that quarter. LSU's crowd was all the way in it. In terms of trying to get off to a good start, that whole idea and objective was pretty much out the window at that point. South Carolina, from that moment on, it was just don't let things snowball and let's try to work our way back into this game. Tahina Pow hit a three-pointer at the very end of the first quarter. It was basically a buzzer beater, and it silenced the crowd. And I think it put South Carolina back within 6 points of the Tigers. So that was a big shot to make up for, again, what was a really bad first quarter on the defensive end of the floor. And then, at the end of the first half, Mylasia Fulwiley, after Haley Van Lith had decided to try and take a shot with about 7-8 seconds left on the clock, South Carolina wound up getting one more possession than they were probably planning on, and they ran down the court. Fulwiley worked her way down towards the right wing, and then she got a pass. She was pretty much wide open. She put up a shot, and she hit it right before the buzzer. And so South Carolina cut the Tigers' lead down to 5 points right before going back into the locker room for halftime. That was a big shot. And I think that really sort of put some fear back into Tiger fans' minds. Not that one shot had a lot to do with it, but, the sequence of events that had taken place throughout those final couple minutes in that second quarter. And we'll discuss that in a bit more detail in a couple of moments. But for South Carolina, a team that for the longest time has not been known for their three-point shooting ability, it has to feel quite good that a big reason why they won this nationally televised game, on the road nonetheless, against the defending national champions, was because of their perimeter shooting. Dawn Staley's got to feel good about that. If you're a South Carolina fan, you ought to feel pretty good about that. Now, again, it's not the only reason that they won this game. The second reason that they won this game was some of the younger players on this team being ready for the moment. Early on in this game, South Carolina, to be honest, there were not many players that were performing up to their usual standards. But there was one player that honestly kind of caught me by surprise with how she performed at the start. And that was Chloe Kitts. Chloe Kitts, to be honest, she's been going through a bit of a funk recently on the court. She has not been able to find a consistent rhythm. I think that she is starting to figure out that she's got to add some more moves to her arsenal when she does have the ball on the low block. But it's a growing process, obviously. It's not going to happen overnight. But last night, I was really impressed with how bad things went at the start of this game. Chloe Kitts, she did not let the crowd noise get to her. She did not let the game get to her. She did not start pressing unnecessarily. She scored 10 points in the first half. And to be quite frank, she was the only player in the entire front court that brought consistent energy on the floor on both ends. Couldn't say that for everybody else. And that's why LSU got off to a pretty decent lead at certain points in the first 20 minutes. But Chloe Kitts, she was sort of, I don't want to say beacon of hope necessarily, but she was somebody that probably helped rally the team by the end of the first half to keep things interesting, tried to keep the energy and effort levels up. So big time credit to her for basically being a true freshman. Although she's classified as a sophomore, this is really her first full year as a player on this team. She did really well considering the moment. Another player that did really well considering the moment was Malaysia Fulwiley. I would argue that when you go back and you watch this game and you see how things unfolded, one of the turning points in this game, long term, was when Fulwiley came into the game late in the second quarter. At that point, South Carolina had just bogged down offensively. They weren't getting out in transition because they weren't doing a good job on the defensive glass. That's a whole nother topic. And so they were getting in the half court. At times they were being a bit predictable. And quite frankly, they were not moving around enough when they did not have the basketball in their hands. And so Dawn Staley, I kind of think, felt like, hey, we've got to get somebody out there that can give us a shot in the arm offensively. And Malaysia Fulwiley, although she could sometimes be hit or miss, being a true freshman, she certainly has the ability to change the complexion of, say, a 5-minute stretch or an entire quarter within just a couple of possessions. And that's what she did late in the second quarter. She made 2 big-time threes. She scored 2 more points on top of that to give her 8 for that entire quarter alone. But the thing that impressed me the most about Fulwiley's play, it wasn't the fact that she hit those 2 3-point shots. It was how she was so composed when she went out there. Think about this. You're a true freshman. A lot of people have dubbed you the next superstar at South Carolina. You've got another superstar true freshman in Michaela Williams on the other team, who was ranked ahead of you coming out of high school. Might be a bit of a motivation factor for Malaysia Fulwiley. She could have gone out there and she could have played potentially some selfish individual type basketball, trying to make things happen, trying to take shots that maybe weren't great looks. She could have done that, and it probably would not have surprised a lot of people if she had done that. But she didn't do that at all. She made the right decision with the basketball pretty much every single time she had it. That impressed me so much. For that kind of game, considering the circumstances, being down like the Gamecocks were at that point, Malaysia Fulwiley helped the Gamecocks turn things around right before halftime. She deserves a lot of credit for that. And then the last reason that the team came out of Baton Rouge with a victory last night is the fact that they have been there and done it. Simply put, this team is battle-tested. This team has been through these kind of games already this season. You look back at the Duke game. You look back at the North Carolina game. You look back at the game against Utah up in Connecticut. South Carolina has been through games this season where they were playing away from home and the game was close late, and either they were down a couple points in certain stretches or they were only up by a couple points, and they had to make plays happen to slam the door shut on their opponents in the fourth quarter. And they have managed to do that every single time, and they did it once again last night. So the one thing you could say about this game being close late is it probably did favor the Gamecocks because they've proven that they can do it on several occasions. LSU, on the other hand, they've had 3 other games like this: Colorado, Virginia, and Auburn. The only game where they've been able to outperform their opponent late has been their game against Virginia. They lost to Colorado, they lost at Auburn, and they lost to South Carolina last night. So, LSU, don't get me wrong, very good team, very talented team. They will go far in the tournament more than likely as long as they get a good draw. But when it comes to close games late, to this point in the season, LSU has proven to struggle in those kind of games. South Carolina, they're South Carolina. They have been there, they have done it, and even though it's a new group, they understand the kind of mentality that you have to carry in those moments. And that is why, on top of everything else I've said to this point, they won this game on Thursday night. Now, as big as this game was for South Carolina, they still have a bunch more games left in the regular season. But is the path a lot easier from here on out now that the LSU game has passed? We'll discuss that in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Now, Gamecock fans, the men's basketball team, they have also been doing quite well as of late. Obviously defeated number 6 Kentucky on Tuesday night, and they're going to be at home once again on Saturday, facing off against the Missouri Tigers, looking to complete the regular season sweep against the Tigers. Now, I posted this on Twitter yesterday. Game Time had tickets as cheap as $14 in the upper bowl. That's no longer the case, folks. The ticket prices now have gone up to $21. That's the cheapest ticket right now in the upper bowl. You can also still get cheap tickets in the lower bowl for as low as $35. So, if you're thinking about going to the game, but maybe you're stressing about missing out because you can't find a ticket, you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you got to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, that's Locked On, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Friday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily watch on YouTube or your daily listen wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. As far as last night's game against LSU is concerned, I think that was the toughest game for South Carolina this season, at least before the NCAA tournament. Of course, we don't know for sure who the Gamecocks will play in the tournament just yet, so not going to include that in this discussion right now. But when just looking at the regular season, I think it's safe to say that the rest of this schedule is pretty much smooth sailing for Don Staley and this team. Now, the Gamecocks do have a real intriguing matchup this coming Sunday against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Yes, I understand, leading into this season, you probably would not expect it to say that, but Vanderbilt has proven to be a much improved team. They're kind of like the South Carolina men's basketball version of the women's side of basketball right now. They have been phenomenal so far in SEC play. I believe they're 4-2 right now. Played Tennessee pretty tough up in Knoxville not that long ago. So I don't think that game is going to be easy by any means, especially if South Carolina is sort of reading their press clippings after defeating LSU last night. So Don Staley is going to have to make sure the team is mentally ready to go to battle against the Commodores this coming Sunday. After that, only a couple more games really of note here. They face Ole Miss on February the 4th. I believe that's 2 Sundays from now. You can't count out the Rebels because they always seem to give South Carolina a bit of a tougher time, at least on the offensive end. However, as we all know, this team is a lot better offensively this year. So unless Ole Miss has improved drastically on offense, I would say that's a game where South Carolina might play them close early, but they pull away as the game goes on. February 11th, they played the UConn Huskies. That's also a Sunday game. This one might be the toughest game of the season just purely because of the talent that UConn still possesses on that team. Obviously, Gino Auriemma, great coach, a Hall of Fame coach. But they have lost AZ Fudd for this season, unfortunately, due to a knee injury. Wish her all the best in her recovery. Paige Beckers has pretty much had to carry that team offensively, so who knows? She might be a bit worn down by this point in this season, considering what all she's had to do. I just like South Carolina's chances against UConn. Obviously, 7 years ago, that was not the case. It was the exact opposite. It was, can South Carolina be competitive against the Huskies? Now, I think it's more so, can the Huskies beat South Carolina? Don Staley has proven to be the better coach, quite frankly, in the past several matchups against the UConn Huskies. And so with that game being at home, I'm sure that game's already a sellout. I plan on being there, and I'm sure it's going to be loud in the Colonial Life Arena. So I think that game is one where you feel confident if you're a South Carolina fan. The last game of note is at Tennessee on February the 15th. Only reason for that, it's a road game. You know the Lady Vol fans are going to show up and show out. And Rakia Jackson, who still plays for the Volunteers, she is one of the better players in the SEC. And I do think she can give South Carolina some problems. But I just don't think Tennessee has enough star power on that roster, not like an LSU, to keep up with South Carolina for 40 minutes. So my whole point here is this. I think that South Carolina, they can pretty much run the table the rest of this regular season. I think the next toughest game they might have, projecting very far out, would probably be the SEC tournament title game. And that's assuming that LSU and South Carolina have a rematch in that game, which if so, grab your popcorn because it could be another good one considering the fact it'll be on a neutral floor. But South Carolina, the thing that should not be overlooked about last night, they defeated LSU in their arena. They weren't playing at home. They weren't playing on a neutral floor. It was pretty much 90% probably LSU and maybe 10% South Carolina, if I had to guess, based on the attendance. So, you were able to knock off LSU, who has all that firepower offensively in their arena. I think that South Carolina basically said last night, again, we are still the team to beat in this sport. Not Iowa, not LSU, not UConn. It's South Carolina. And everybody else is still chasing us. So, we'll talk more about maybe teams that they have to worry about come NCAA tournament time. But as far as the rest of the regular season is concerned, I'm going to assume I'm not going to have to do a show at some point where I come on here and just talk about how they played a disastrous game against one of these teams. Again, Ole Miss could give them some problems. You kind of could see it being a closer game. And Tennessee, who knows? If some weird things happen, maybe that game's close. But I just think South Carolina, they're going to have an easier time the rest of the way with how these games are scheduled and where they're taking place for the most part. Now, with all of the success that South Carolina's basketball programs have had this week, we need to have a serious conversation about how both of these teams are being promoted and what the school and what really everybody is doing to pitch in to make sure that these teams are getting the recognition they deserve. I'm going to dive into that discussion a lot more in just a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, if you join FanDuel right now as a new customer, you can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets whether you win or lose on your bet. Championship Sunday is going to take place this coming Sunday as the 49ers will take on the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens will take on the Kansas City Chiefs. So what are the Super Bowl odds for each of these teams? Well, the 49ers are currently the favorite, being listed at plus 140. Behind them is the Ravens at plus 170, the Chiefs at plus 450, and the Lions are at plus 850. So, do you think one of the heavy favorites like the 49ers or Ravens are going to make it to the Super Bowl? Or do you think one of these underdogs, maybe the Lions, can pull off the upset on Sunday and wind up in Vegas a couple weeks from now? Either way, the FanDuel app is easy to use and you can bet on anything from spreads to player props and more. So, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. It's been a great 3-day stretch for the University of South Carolina as far as basketball is concerned. On Tuesday night, the men's basketball team knocked off number 6 Kentucky in the Colonial Life Arena on national television, basically. On Thursday night, the women's basketball team remained undefeated and knocked off the number 9 LSU Tigers, the defending national champions in women's college hoops. Did it on ESPN, on the road. With the momentum wave that's been created by these two basketball programs right now, South Carolina as a whole needs to take advantage of this. I just mentioned what both of these teams did in their individual games over the past couple days, but as a whole, this school has been the best on the court this season. Got to give credit to Mike Uva of Gamecock Central for this stat that he posted last night. Both the men's and women's basketball teams are a combined 34-3. That is the best combined record in all of college hoops. The university, the athletic department, the social media departments, the fans, everybody needs to fully get behind these programs and take advantage of this run. South Carolina is going to start getting a lot more attention from this point forward, as long as both of these teams, for the most part, take care of business. I understand on the men's side, you might define that a little bit differently. The women's side, I think it's fair to say they will take care of business. Men's side, don't lose to a Missouri, don't lose to a Vanderbilt, and get a couple more quad one wins. And then you can really start having a lot more fun with them. But everybody needs to do their part, because exposure is really important with these programs. For a team like South Carolina, for a school like South Carolina, obviously football is thought of as the primary sport. And I would say that football is the primary sport when it comes to interest. But as we've talked about before, this fan base is very unique because this fan base really doesn't care what sports you play. You could be the football team, it could be a basketball team, it could be freaking water polo. If you are a winner, fans from South Carolina, fans of South Carolina are going to show up and they are going to support you no matter what. Because this fan base is loyal, and if you give them a reason to want to come to every game, they will show up. Well, the women's basketball team has been doing it for several years, and now, for the first time, really truthfully in 3 years, the men's basketball team is giving the fans the same kind of reason to show up to their games. So, social media departments, the content that you pump out for the next few weeks, for the next month and a half, it's got to be phenomenal. It's got to be up there amongst the best of the best in your respective sport. Any stats that you can show, particularly for Lamont Paris, when it comes to development, how much better the team is compared to last year, put it out there. Let the world see it. As far as the athletic department is concerned, I know that you invest a good amount with the women's basketball program. Obviously, you should. You got a Hall of Fame coach that's leading that program that's won multiple national titles. For the men's basketball program, if I'm the athletic department sometime soon, maybe after the season, if you want to wait that long, I'm going to send someone down to the Colonial Life Arena, find Lamont Paris, have a notepad and a pen, and I'm going to sit there and just ask him, are there any parts of this program that you would like to have improved? And if so, what is it? Name it. We will address it immediately. I would do that. You need to show that you care about those sports. You need to give them the support that, quite frankly, they have earned and they deserved. On the fan side of things, again, for women's basketball, you don't have to worry about that. The fans have got that sport covered. Men's basketball, finally starting to see the fan support show up again. The student section has been phenomenal this season. And in terms of season ticket holders getting other general tickets sold in the Colonial Life Arena, that is getting better. It could be better and more consistent, but it is getting better. And again, I understand why for the past couple years, maybe people weren't quite as excited about going to those games. But fans need to continue to show support. Social media departments, you need to go into hyperdrive the next few weeks. Get that exposure. Get your name out there to recruits. The state of South Carolina, as we've also discussed in the past, it's been known to produce quality high school basketball talent. And every couple years, pretty much a superstar that's an eventual NBA player. Get your name out there. Get Lamont Paris's name out there. Get Don Staley's name out there. Build yourself up like you're a basketball school. Not saying South Carolina is now just a full-blown basketball school, but the point here is you've got to take advantage of this momentum. Think about it. South Carolina went to the Final Four in both sports in 2017. They won the national championship on the women's side. Nobody outside of South Carolina really talks about that. It's now pretty much an answer to a trivia question. Now, granted, social media back then was just really starting to take hold of college athletics. It wasn't really that much of a thing yet at that point, but now it is. Being able to sell and market and promote your program, it means a lot. I know some people are going to sit there and say, well, so does NIL. That's besides the point. Marketing and promoting departments, have yourself a meeting in the middle of the season, reevaluate what you're doing. Are we doing everything we can to be the best on Saturdays, on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays, whenever these teams are playing? Everybody's got to bring it. This is a golden opportunity for the University of South Carolina to really announce its overall presence in the world of basketball. The women's basketball team already has helped the university in that regard for the past 6, 7, 8, 9 years under Don Staley's watch. But if you can tell both the women's and the men's teams side by side together, that can really help you out. It would help out the baseball program. It would help out Shane Beamer and the football program. And the culture at South Carolina between the coaches is phenomenal. The coaches cheer on one another. That was not exactly happening 10, 12 years ago. And that's not me trying to insinuate that the coaches disliked each other back then, but you weren't seeing these coaches go out of their way to support these other programs. Shane Beamer went to the men's basketball game. Don Staley went to the men's basketball game, and all his tweets about Lamont Paris and that team. Mark Kingston brought up the basketball programs at his press conference the other day, talking about the baseball team. Tony Annan, the men's soccer coach, tweeted about the women's basketball team's win over LSU on Thursday night. Everybody is working more in the same direction now. It feels like, at least when it comes to the coaches. But obviously, that can be derailed if not everybody's on the same page in that athletic department, when it comes to the administration at the university, when it comes to overall fan support. Y'all, it's time to get behind both of these programs and push them forward. If you can do that, you can really potentially change the whole perception around South Carolina as just one of those teams where it's like, well, they got women's basketball, and sure, their baseball program every couple of years, it's kind of solid, but they don't really have a whole lot else. That's how the rest of the country views South Carolina. Hate to say it like that, but it's the truth. With men's basketball and women's basketball doing well, and men's basketball, when it comes to just sheer revenue numbers, being one of the biggest driving sports in college athletics, and women's basketball obviously elevating itself and trying to get to that same kind of stature, you got to push all your chips to the middle of the table right now. You've got to take advantage of this, or else you could look back on it like you do the Final Fours from 2017 and say, that was a missed opportunity. We could have done better then. You don't want to have that same kind of regret this time around. So let's make sure that's not the case. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show. As always, what were y'all's thoughts on the win over LSU? What is it that you think led to South Carolina walking out of the Pete Maravich Center with a victory on Thursday night? What's your thoughts on the rest of the regular season when looking at the schedule? And lastly, do you think that it's time to take advantage of this momentum wave that both of these basketball programs are riding right now? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Friday and a fantastic weekend. And I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.